Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Nice to see you all again. Today I'm gonna have a bit of a blather about a subject that, to me at least, is very interesting indeed, and that will hopefully be of interest to some of you. I'm going to talk about age and language learning and how much effect age has on our ability to learn new languages. What I'm going to say here may be a bit controversial in some sense, not in the sense that anyone's going to kick my door down over it obviously, but in the sense that it may evoke a certain amount of passionate disagreement. I suppose we will find out. My position is basically as follows. Serious language learning is a young person's game. I want to say a young man's game, but I'm not chauvinistic enough to put it like that, so we'll say it is a young person's game. What do I mean by serious language learning? I mean language learning when people are trying to get up to at least a solid B2 type level, and perhaps even beyond that to C1 and above. If you're aiming for those truly upper intermediate or advanced levels of ability, then yes, language learning is a young person's game. It's always seemed to me that there's a surprising lack of scientific consensus on this question: can people learn languages or learn them properly after 20 or the age of 20, that is to say, or 25 or 30 or 15 or whatever. People argue about this, they argue back and forth, but that's actually not what I want to talk about today. It seems fairly clear that there is some sort of decline in our raw ability to learn foreign languages as we get older. Having said that, it's obviously true, it's very clear that there are many people who learn foreign languages to a very respectable extent, despite the fact that they started to learn them when they were in their late teens or in their early 20s or even in their 30s or what have you. So we know that some people can do it. And we know that some people can do it even with very alien to them languages. What fraction exactly of the human population retains this ability to learn languages well, even as adults? I don't have the answer to that question, and it's not entirely clear to me that anyone does. But what I want to talk about today is a little bit different. I want to talk about a suite, if you like, of psychological and social factors that have a very powerful influence on our ability to learn languages as we get older. And it is my contention that this combination of factors makes it highly, highly improbable that any given person will learn a language well past a certain age. When we're younger, we are in the process of trying to create ourselves as fully fledged adults. What do I mean by that? Well, I started learning Japanese at university when I was 19 years old. And all I'd done in life, in one sense, all I'd done in life was my A-levels, right? I'd done my A-levels, that's the equivalent of high school in Britain, for those of you who don't know what that is. You finish university, you have some A-levels, you have a couple of hobbies, but you haven't done very much in life. And many people have not developed any complex skill to any meaningful extent at all, and that of course is one of the things that you're trying to do at university. Maybe you're not trying to develop a complex skill, but you're trying to develop some sort of understanding, some sort of level of ability in something that is difficult and cognitively demanding, right? So I started studying Japanese when I was 19 years old, and like many, but not all, students in the United Kingdom, I was fortunate enough to be financially supported by my parents throughout my degree, which meant that I had as much time as I wanted to study Japanese. And because I quickly realized that I enjoyed Japanese very much and that I was at least reasonably good at it, I spent a lot of time studying. I don't know whether I was aware of this at the time, but in retrospect it's clear to me that I was taking Japanese and my studies of Japanese, and I was making them the pillar of my identity as a young man. When we don't have anything, when we haven't achieved anything, when we aren't particularly good at anything, even if we have talent and potential, then who are we? Who are we in society? What is it that we are? When you're younger, you're trying to find an answer, or answers, plural perhaps, to that sort of question, whether you realize it or not. It's about defining who you are. It's about having a social presence in the world. It's about having something that you can tell other people when they ask you who you are and what you do. This is important to all of us. For many of us, especially in wealthy Western societies, this period from the age of 18, maybe a little bit younger, but let's say 18, until the age of perhaps 25 is a bit of a golden age, actually, in our personal development. It's a golden age in various senses. It's a golden age in the sense that we are relatively undeveloped and that we therefore have the potential to develop. It's a golden age in the sense that many of us, not all of us, have a huge amount of spare time, either because our parents are paying for us to go to university, or because they're just, in a sense, sponsoring us. They're letting us stay at home, all right? They're letting us live at home while we do whatever the hell we want to do. Now, for some students, of course, not only for students, not only for university students, for many people this isn't true. They don't have this degree of financial largesse in their lives. But it is true for many people, and it was true for me, and it might be true for you. It might have been true for you if you're watching this video. And these factors combine to create a bit of a golden age when we have a huge amount of time and mental energy that we can commit to developing complex skills, in the context of this video, most obviously, learning some sort of language. Eventually we leave university and, or we didn't go there in the first place perhaps, and sooner or later most of us have to get a job, right? Most of us have to get a job. So we get a job and we find naturally that we have much less free time, and we start to form, in a sense. We have a job, maybe we work on a career, our career comes to be important to us. Even when we're not working, we don't have as much energy left over in the free time that's left over to us. So continuing to try and develop any sort of complex skill comes to be quite difficult. Whether you have or have not learnt some language, it is certainly going to come to be quite difficult once you have a job. And I see this in some of the people that I teach. I'm thinking specifically of people I teach Japanese to, but it's true of anyone trying to learn a language when they have a job. So our social identities come to be more and more robust, more and more developed as we move through our 20s. Many of us get into relationships, some of us will have children in our 20s, some of us will buy houses and have mortgages and take on other responsibilities. And of course this all eats into the amount of time and energy and motivation that we have left to study languages. It also strips away to some extent the incentives that we might have had. We are formed now to some extent. We have presumably succeeded in building some sort of social, professional identity for ourselves, and there isn't as much room to put new pillars into that. There isn't as much need to put new pillars into that. So the transformative effect that learning a language can have on your life in terms of work, career, travel, relationships, it's very difficult for any new language that you might learn, or your first language, your first foreign language, if you haven't learned one before. It's very difficult for any new language you might learn to have that same transformative effect on you. You know, putting a new feather in your cap counts for quite a lot when your cap doesn't have any feathers in it. But if your cap already has a number of feathers in it, if you already have 7 or 8 pillars, let's say, to your identity, or 4 or 5, I mean, they're difficult to count, obviously. But when that identity is formed, you don't have the same kind of incentive anymore. That burning passion that you need, especially if you want to get good at a genuinely alien language, it is going to have subsided to some extent. And even if you think you still feel it, you may well find that it's difficult to maintain it over time with all the other demands on your time. If you are a native speaker of English, or for that matter any other European language, then I can promise you that languages like Japanese and Chinese in particular, and presumably Arabic, Korean, I don't know, Swahili, or Hindi, or these very alien languages, you cannot believe what kind of time sink these languages can turn into until you try studying one. You can read about it on the internet, but I promise you, you will not really appreciate it until you try. I only know one person who has come to be genuinely quite advanced at a genuinely fairly alien language when he commenced studying it at roughly the age of 40 or above. And that person, surprise, surprise, is me. That should tell you that my life has turned out to be rather unusual in certain regards. Obviously, I don't want to talk about this in detail, but if you know that I took up Russian at the age of 39 and studied it pretty damn intensively for 5 years and continued studying it after that 5-year period had elapsed, then you can probably guess that my life has turned out to be a bit unorthodox. Given that I probably speak Russian now at a pretty strong C1 level, in most regards better than I speak Japanese, and perhaps better than I ever spoke Japanese, then you would be justified in thinking that various things have gone fairly seriously wrong in my life, because when things go right in your life, often you have all these other various things in your life that would make it impossible or undesirable to study a language like that. You have to have a very unusual surplus of spare time and a very unusual ongoing desire to develop new complex skills if you want to do something like that when you are basically more or less 40. So the reason really that serious language study is a young person's game is that once you reach a certain age, you will either not have the incentives, or you will not have the time, or you will not have the energy to study a new language, or you will not have any of those things. Now, if you develop an interest in traveling in Italy and you decide to try and get to a B1 level of Italian, assuming again that your native language is a European language, then that will be eminently doable for most people, I imagine. I'm not saying that one cannot learn languages at all, but it is very, very uncommon to encounter people who learn languages to advanced levels if they start them late in life. I really just cannot think of that many examples at all. Undoubtedly they exist. I'm not saying I'm the only person who's ever done it, but I do not think there are that many people out there. So if you want to disagree with what I'm saying, it's a simple matter. All you have to do is give me some examples of perhaps people here on YouTube who have done this, who have taken up languages, preferably relatively alien, exotic, subjectively speaking, languages, and learnt them to a very respectable level after the age of, let's say for the sake of argument, 40. And by the way, please don't bring Steve Kaufman up as an example. Steve has a very respectable level of ability at certain languages, but unless I am misreading, so to speak, the biography that he has presented on YouTube, the only languages that he's any good at are those that he learned decades ago when he was in his 20s/30s. My understanding is that he came back to language learning when he was about 60. He can correct me if I'm wrong, but he is, I'm going to be polite and say that he's not very good at the languages that he has learned after that age. And yes, I can speak Russian and I can listen to his Russian, and it's not, I'm going to be polite and say that it's not that great. So please don't bring Steve Kaufman up as an example. You know, learning bad Italian or bad Portuguese later in life, once you've already learned French, and I think also Spanish as a language that he studied to some extent when he was younger, that is not a huge achievement. That's not the type of thing I'm talking about. This question as to whether or not we are neurologically capable of learning languages later in life, that's not really what I'm addressing here. Obviously we are to some extent, but the point I really want to make is that once you reach a certain age in life, the incentives are not there and the time is not there, and motivation collapses and disintegrates very rapidly and very easily, initial good intentions notwithstanding. That is it for today. If you want to agree, disagree, tell me that I'm talking rubbish, tell me that I'm a genius, you can do all of that in the comments. Of course, I'm perfectly happy to make videos on some other subject if somebody wants to hear my opinion on something else. So thanks very much for listening. I'll see you next time, and ciao ciao, bye bye.